My name is Nathan Chaney. I have this kind of fun brand that I'm building called Supply Chaney. And I just like to talk to people about supply chain all day, every day, and sometimes record it. And today, on this Friday here at UNT Dallas, I'm excited to do it again. And so got a couple of panelists here. And what we're going to attempt to do is kind of replicate a little bit of what I do on the Supply Chaney podcast, which is talk about the personal lives a little bit of the people in supply chain, talk about their professional journeys in the industry, and then kind of get down to drilling into the practitioner elements about what they do on a day-to-day basis. And so I'll just kind of pause there, take a moment to allow Michelle to introduce herself.
Thank you, Nathan. My name is Michelle Bowling. I'm director on our rail practice at Oliver Wyman. I've been with OW for about 2.5 years now, but I came in from the industry and the consulting world. That's a specialist that Oliver Wyman puts together. But my background is on the rail side and logistics side. I spent about 14 years with BNSF Railway in various capacities. They got me straight out of college as a sophomore for a couple of internship summers and then went full-time as a management trainee and kind of worked my way up through there. And then I spent about 6 years with Watco, and I was on the logistics side. So they have a 3PL division there. I put together rail logistics service offerings, new verticals, a lot of process, procedure, all the weird stuff that the rail and the terminal teams didn't know what to do with. That kind of got flipped over to the fence to my team. We figured it out. And then I joined OW 2.5 years ago. And then outside of that, I have my husband and I have 4 kids together, a blended family. Our oldest just went off to the Air Force and our youngest is 6. So a wide range. And we have a hotshot trucking company. So 1 truck, 1 trailer, and my husband does that full time.
Excellent. Thanks for joining in.
Thank you for having me.
Allan.
So Allan Rutter, the Texas A&M Transportation Institute. I've been with our folks for about 14 years now. Because I'm really, really old. Like the Johnny Cash song, I've been everywhere. That's pretty much my career. A lot of it having to do with the public sector side of transportation. I am a professionally trained bureaucrat from the LBJ School of Public Affairs. And so part of that was getting into helping people understand transportation for how it gets funded, how it gets provided on the public side. I have 2 adult daughters, one of whom is the mother of 2 of our grandsons. So everybody who had told me that grandparenting was the greatest thing ever, they have undersold it. I mean, it is just the coolest thing ever. It's basically the profit margin on parenting. That's
Nice.
how it works. So that's my gig, is as much as I can do to allow me to be grandfather or poppy to my two boys.
Excellent. Maybe a little bit of background on myself then, to kind of be the caboose on this intro wagon. I'm born and raised here in Texas, grew up mostly out near Tyler, out on some land, came here to University of North Texas and was kind of in the earlier sort of classes of folks that got a degree in logistics and supply chain. And so I've spent about a dozen years as an operator building and running 3PL operations, trucking operations. I owned and I still operate my own freight brokerage as well, I suppose. And so I've spent many a day and night in a warehouse packing boxes or interviewing students to hire to go pack boxes or drive trucks, and I've dabbled a little bit in the manufacturing. I worked for the Texas Instruments, where you can't really throw a stone here in DFW and not find someone who's worked at TI, and done a little bit of Silicon Valley tech, autonomous trucks and stuff as well. So I've dabbled a little bit in everything and kind of wound up kind of being able to do what I do today, which is just be an advocate for the whole supply chain industry and just have conversations and just help kind of be the tide that lifts all boats in supply chain. So, but today we're talking about rail specifically, and let's kind of start with our first stop at that personal story a little bit. So, you alluded to, the family and going to school and going directly to BNSF,
Yeah.
But kind of rewind a little bit before that. What inspired you to kind of like, what did you study? We've got some students in the room. What did you study? Why? And then like kind of, what was your first step and why BNS?
Yeah, that's a good question. If I go back to that time, I remember I went to a high school designed as a magnet program to go be a doctor. And through that, I realized I don't want to go to school for that long and I would rather run the hospital. So I went into school. I went into St. Mary's with the intention of going into business. I majored in corporate finance. And my thought going in there was I will go out and run a hospital one day. Sophomore year came along and the dean of the business school called me one night, and I thought I might be in trouble for something, but she called and asked if I would apply. She said, "Hey, this company called BNSF Railway, they're coming to campus. Would you apply for the scholarship?" And it was a competition, and I won the competition. So I got 2 summer internships out of that. I started with them in the equipment team, and then I went over my second summer and I was in internal audit. So I was doing internal fraud investigations and fun stuff like that, Aaron Brockovich style, I say. And they offered me a management trainee position my very last day there. So I like to say I did not plan to come into rail. I was first generation college student. We were poor. I didn't realize how poor, but the closest I got to rail, I was thinking about this the other day, is I lived right across from a railroad track. So you would hear it, but that was in growing up, that was the connection I had to railroads. I'd never thought of it as a career path. And then I ended up loving rail, loving BNSF while I was there. And that led me into the logistics space. And now I consult for rail from the industry side. So pretty fun path there.
I think that what you highlight there, though, is that path of scholarships and
Yeah.
internships and how that investment early on in students' lives can really move the arc of their entire career and put them on a track to being your next best employee one day.
Yeah, and I think even an investment later on in life, I didn't think I was going to make a leap into consulting, but I knew I wanted something different. And I had to make a decision. Do I invest in a career coach or someone who can help with the LinkedIn and the resume writing? And when you're faced with that decision, again, we have 4 kids, so every dollar counts. And we had to say, okay, well, is it worth it to spend X amount on that investment in yourself? And at the end of the day, it played out because we said, okay, well, I'll invest in myself. If this works, I'm going to make this up in full. So it's never stopped from a scholarship as you're younger to how do you find ways to invest in your own skill sets and building your own brand out there.
Right.
So, yeah.
Excellent. Good plug there. Allan, what about your story?
I think I'd never really intended to go into transportation. But when you're at the LBJ school, one of the things you do between your first and second year, or in your second year, is you do an internship. Given that we were all in Austin, that meant going to the capital somewhere. And my college Sunday school teacher's nephew was the new chairman of the House Transportation Committee. David Kane went on to become a state senator from Dallas. And so David was a transportation guy, so I got it. Uncle Pat got me a job with David doing transportation stuff. Turns out that one of our group research projects was about highway finance, so more transportation. So by the time I finished school, a classmate of mine had worked on the Mondale campaign and came back to the Capitol to be David's committee clerk at the Transportation Committee. He said, and I've just gotten married, just had a new kid. Having a job, no matter what it was with insurance, is like, let's do that.
Yeah.
That's a good idea. And so I then began this journey, which was mainly helping people around the Capitol, mainly for working for governors. I ended up working for 4 different governors as their transportation guy. And what that meant was helping them understand how the tech stop worked and where the money came from and how the money worked. But given that that also meant thinking about legislation that came up every other year, lots of railroad stuff. So I got to meet all the railroad guys, all the lobbyists for the various railroads. And by the time I started, there were more of them because they hadn't consolidated yet. But one of those processes was next to the last governor I worked for was Governor Bush, who becomes president. And it's like, well, I've got teenage daughters. I'm not really sure I want to go to D.C., but how often does the president know who you are? You should probably do something with that. So I had the chance, was talking to the transition guys, and they said, well, Allan, what do you want to do? I said, what do you mean? Dude, you're the governor's transportation guy. You can choose a job. And so the Federal Railroad Administration looked like a good opportunity. It was the first time I would have a chance to actually manage anybody, having been a staff person. And because I'd known all the rail guys, they helped sell me to the rest of the rail industry to say, I was a good guy. It turned out that one of the major rail labor guys in D.C. was a Texan, James Brunkenhafer, and he helped communicate to the rail labor guys, yeah, he's a Republican, but it'll be okay. And so I had the chance to be confirmed to go to D.C. My family managed to make that happen. And my two daughters now talk to us again, but I'm moved between their sophomore and junior years of high school, the older one there and the younger one coming back. But they all lived through it and it all worked out. But I'd say the communication, understanding how the railroads worked. I was at the governor's office when both BNSF combination and the UPSB in particular happened while I was at the governor's office. So it put me in a place to understand how things happen and how all that stuff worked. Got to DC, got incredibly homesick. The first time we'd ever been separated from family, and all you guys understand that family matters a whole lot. So had the chance to come back to Texas to be the deputy director of the Tollway Authority, which got created here in DFW when I was at the governor's office. So I collected quarters at the Tollway Authority for a while and then did consulting. And 14 years ago, talked to the TTI folks who had been trying to find freight people, either who understood how to talk to railroads or who understood how to talk to TxDOT. And I said, I think I could do that. And it's been a really great gig. It's a good place to be.
Excellent. I always enjoy hearing that story. And now second time, because Allan has been on my podcast. So if you want to do the deep dive of this, go look him up there. And the invite will be going to Michelle here shortly,
Thank you.
suppose. But let's start bridging this toward the practitioner side, but with some emphasis on just leadership and development. And you touched on this a while ago, Michelle. So now having everybody on this stage now has been responsible for other people, taking care of their clients. Any kind of lessons in leadership, that you like to leave with people when asked, whether they be students or colleagues, any sort of nuggets of wisdom there, Michelle?
Yeah, I think Allan hit on it first. And what has taken me a while to learn is family is number one. And I think when I first joined Oliver Wyman was probably the first time I have felt fully allowed to come to work as myself, including part of me who is a mother and a wife and has family obligations. And so I think being able to set that boundary up earlier in your career so that you, one, take care of yourself, two, you're there for your family. At the end of the day, that's who's around. And, if you do that right in a way that sets the tone for your team, that is going to make your team successful because they're going to know you care about them. You're going to be able to model the way in caring for yourself. And that's one thing I go into with the team members I work with now and appreciate about the clients that we work with now is that, for an example, one of my current clients knew our son was graduating from Air Force basic training, and it was a super busy time with an acquisition, and he said, go to that. He said, do not miss a work or do not miss that for a work event, and really appreciate when clients have that same thoughtfulness around, hey, we all have lives to live. We will get the work done, but the important piece is the family. So I think setting those boundaries early is important and in a way that makes sure everyone's on the same page.
I think what I'm hearing you say there a little bit is that do as I do is kind of the ultimate sort of way to lead, right? Rather than you being do as I say. I'm going to work all weekend. I'm missing my kids' soccer games, whatever. But y'all take time, right? So goes both ways.
Yeah, one of the partners when I first came in, she gave me this idea, and it's worked for me. Is I block every weekday from like 5 to 8. And being consultant, you don't get to normally just not work at night. But from 5 to 8, no one blocks over my calendar. I can go pick up my kids. I can go to their band performances. I can feed them, hang out with my husband, and then get back to work. And that's just like gets back to that, oh, here's the expectation. And for my team members who don't yet have families, it's not any different. It's not like, oh, because you don't have kids, you can't take care of yourself. So those team members, the people that take Spanish classes, or they'll run to the gym, or they'll find something that's a stress reliever for them, just as important if you're an individual or if you have a full family.
And I think maybe before we go to Allan, for the students in the room, the fun thing, reliving back when we had our first jobs, is that whatever it is, whatever sort of habit you put in on day one and expectation you put on day one with an employer or a job, that is what's going to live. And you can't take back time once you give it sort of later, right? You can't change the precedent that you've set. So, as you're doing that, you're going and embarking upon your career, just know that the thing you do on day one is going to stick with you. So set as good a habits as you can. What about you, Allan, on the topic of leadership?
I think one of the things that struck me is to watch how other people lead so that you understand what you like and what you don't like. Eventually, you might be in a position where you're helping lead other people. And for me, it was a long time before I got to that part. But I was in a position to know, having worked around a lot of different elected officials, that's good. I like how that feels. That I hate. I don't like that at all. So that once I got to the point of being responsible for other people, it was like, okay, let's execute the kinds of things that made you feel good. And part of that is making people feel seen. When somebody does something well, telling them that you saw them do that well. And then also being in a position to treat people fairly and be the same person to different folks at the same time. But a lot of it was how to watch other people do things well. I remember making a transition into working for Governor Bush, and it had been at an environment where it wasn't as much fun. And so when people ask me, how's the new job? And I says, I can't tell if it just doesn't suck or if it's actually good. It turns out it was really good. And he was a great boss. You're going to find yourself in different kinds of situations like that. So watch how other people treat you, watch how you like being treated, so that when you get to the position when you're a team leader, you're going to treat your team the way you like to be treated.
Taking a note on that one. So Michelle, let's start turning the conversation a little bit to the practitioner side here a little bit.
Okay.
And you mentioned a while ago that Oliver Wyman comes out with a study and a survey every 5 years of shippers, and thought this crowd might be interested to kind of get a quick Spark Notes version, I guess, of what you all found.
Yeah. So we put out we call it a shipper survey. It goes out to companies. So if you think of a Walmart on the retail side, or if you think of a Home Depot or a steel manufacturer, to those companies that ship via rail and truck. And this year we really focused on what, as a shipper, will it take for you to shift volume from truck to rail. Now, being a truck company owner, there's a time and place for everything. I'm a big proponent of freight rail. So I think there's an opportunity across the board for things to ship the way they should ship, optimally, price competitively, safely, all of those things. But we asked, how can we get more freight onto the rail? And one of the newer things this year was there was a more optimistic view of freight rail and railroads than there was in the last survey. However, that wasn't moving the needle on shippers saying, I'm going to put more freight on rail. It's still too complicated, is what we heard. And that means shippers who have to learn 6 different rail systems to be able to ship something from A to B. That's shippers who talked about, hey, if I call and ask for a rate or a quote on something, or I have an opportunity and I don't really know how to navigate that, it can take months with the freight railroad provider to get a rate. Whereas if you call my husband on a trucking company, 30 seconds, he's giving you the price. So how do we get there as rail industry leaders, as influencers in the space, to make it easier to shape that demand and not really forget that we are focused on rail carriers and what that supply looks like in the freight space, but also how do we shift over to help shape the demand side of it, right? We have to tackle both. So there were just a few key findings from the shipper survey. If anyone's interested, we can send it out after. But a lot of fun, and we'll do it in another 5 years and see how the landscape changes.
Okay. All right. Thanks for the update. We'll check back in 5 years. Allan, so I think I've noticed or have heard that you now are sitting in this seat sometimes, and you're kind of hosting a podcast, and you're getting voices, and you're kind of making sure that people know what's going on. Can you kind of talk a little about what that experience has been like and what kind of topics you all talk about?
So I host a podcast, Thinking Transportation, TTI's podcast. I took it over about 1.5 years ago. Being a podcast listener, it was a whole lot of fun to actually do the thing that I get to listen to other people. Our purpose primarily is to tell other people about what TTI does. And the good news is, being a really large organization with about 450 full-time researchers all across the state and all across the country, what kinds of things our guys do. So that's been a really interesting process of being able to learn by talking to people, which is one of the things I enjoy doing anyway. So that's been a whole lot of fun. I think the other thing that I have built sort of discipline to do is to try to be part of LinkedIn 3 times a week. And that forces me to read and find out what's going on other places, and then to be able to communicate to people, this thing just happened. Here's kind of what it means. If you want to learn more about it, here's where you can read about it. And so that helps me keep on top of railroad stuff, both at the private sector level and particularly at the public sector level, given that where I've come from. So part of what all that looks like, you can't swing a cap without hitting the Union Pacific Norfolk Southern merger, which is the big 800-pound gorilla in the room. We're not going to talk about that in part because we might have something to do with the transaction, or we want to stay neutral about that. But it's hard not to know that that's happened and how people are thinking about it and what that looks like. And what it looks like for the rail industry while it's under discussion. How do those class one railroads work with each other while two of them are trying to do something and the other four are throwing rocks at them? How does that look like on a daily basis at the sort of terminal level of where things actually have to happen when the guys in the C-suite are not maybe having to perform in ways that look like they're not getting along? And then what does that look like to try to maintain your market share and maybe grow it at a time when so much stuff is happening on the truck side, and to keep up with automation trends that are advancing at breakneck speed on the truck side, and to try to make sure that that part of it doesn't get so far ahead that it starts making market share decisions for the industry in ways that doesn't treat rail fairly.
Michelle, I think that technology is one of your kind of favorite topics. And,
Yes.
and Allan was kind of teeing it up there a little bit. You want to kind of run with that a little further from your purview there at Oliver Wyman.
Yeah, I think you mentioned, how do we continue to keep up with technology and not let a merger distract from innovation that needs to happen in the rail space? And I don't know that there's a right answer or an only answer to that question. I think when we look at freight rail, it generally lags in terms of innovation. Now, you will see each railroad will claim they're best in class for each of their own lines, right? But as one of my tech startup friends has told me, that value ends at the end of their line. Unless you can start talking to one another, whether that is through a merger or through a partnership or through the use of technology, a shipper doesn't want to go and learn those 6 different websites to find a car that may be across from Chicago from one railroad to another. Finding a way to utilize AI and technology so that it's easier for a shipper, just as easy as it is for me to pick up the phone and say, I'm looking for this particular shirt, right? And then here's all your shirt options, and here's how easy it is for you to get a shirt by tomorrow morning. And if you want to pay less, you can get it tomorrow afternoon. So how do we get to that level of ease utilizing the technology that exists today, but in a way that speaks to the railroads so that they are more willing to move in that direction, not being distracted by what's going on in their larger worlds and continuing to get closer to what's going to shift that freight from truck.
Okay. So that's a very truck and rail sort of centered answer there.
Yes.
Allan, I think you have this big purview of multimodal and you kind of look at the whole ecosystem of supply chain. Can you kind of expound on that, but looking at all the different modes that are out there? And you talked a lot about pipelines on the podcast even. So let's not forget about them.
So I just keep it on technology.
Mhm.
I think one of the things that's happening, particularly in Texas, is in part because of a legislative approach to allow for experimentation of automated trucks to happen here. A lot of that is happening in Texas, in part because of a legislative structure that allows people to experiment. The other thing is it's easy to do that in Texas, relatively flat, relatively not a whole lot of snow and ice. So if you're going to do that kind of thing on Texas roads, it's an easier environment to demonstrate that technology than it might be in Michigan or North Dakota. So part of the next round of demonstration of automated trucking is how do they take the technology they've been demonstrating and put it into environments that aren't quite as easy or friendly as Texas is. But the same thing to watch is how the legislature has responded to, okay, a bunch of these people are saying, we're going to have trucks without drivers. It's like, really? How do elected officials feel about their grandparents being on I-45 next to a truck that doesn't have a driver? What's that conversation like? So this particular previous session, the legislature said, if you want to do that, and we hear you want to, you need to do these things to tell us how that's going to work. You need to have a plan for how you're going to interact with first responders. Because if this truck is on the side of the road, a first responder needs to know that's that kind of truck, and here's how that interaction is going to go. And then we also need to know, if you're going to do that, we need to know which trucks they are. Are you going to say you want to do that or not? So I think that watching how technology advances in some of these different platforms, the other thing to keep in mind is, as this trucking automation is happening, all kinds of other parts of the world are automating port operations and how things move from a ship to the ground. I think a lot of U.S. ports are starting to make some improvements within terminals. Intermodal changes are a lot more automated than they used to be. So it's interesting watching how different nodes of transportation from one to the other, there's a lot more automation happening.
Just all over the place.
Oh, yeah.
Everything more automation, but it I think there's a chorus happening where leaders in the industry are trying to kind of remind everybody that at the core it is still a people business, and supply chains and logistics and trains and trucks and ships all still run on people, and so we always want to kind of make sure that we don't forget about that, even as the truck may be driving itself down the road with nobody in it. Somewhere there is, somewhere there's someone in the loop. I noticed, Allan, that you looped in safety on your last comments there, and I know that rail safety and transportation safety is a key passion of yours. How is kind of like the innovation and the technology that exists out there today affecting safety in logistics?
I think rail's a good example of that. There's an awful lot of technology that's being adapted, experimented with, and it's a matter of, what does the technology do? How does it increase safety outcomes, make it safer for communities that the railroads operated in and the crews that are on the railroads doing that kind of work? And so one of the interesting things that's going to happen with this particular administration, which is as much labor focused as they are industry focused. How can transportation safety improvements happen on the railroad in ways that enhance rail labor's job? I think that a good example of that is some technology that BNSF had tried to implement to have wayside monitors look at how wheels and brakes were performing, and in ways that was a whole lot more detailed and a lot more granular than even somebody driving an ATV in a yard might be able to interpret. And what that meant was they would be able to identify things that need to be fixed faster. And then for the rail labor who does the rail car repair, what that meant is they're not out in the yard chasing what might be going wrong. They're actually in a warehouse fixing the car. They'd like to do that. It takes more time. It's a lot more money, and it's a controlled environment. They're not out in 115 degrees in Phoenix or 45 degrees below in Minot. That's a better job for them. So higher safety outcomes, better working conditions for the rail labor. I think there are win-wins for both that make it more cost-effective for the railroad and for shippers, and better safety outcomes for communities the railroads operate.
Okay, thank you for that. Joe, as we kind of wrap up here, one of the things that we were talking about before we came on is one of the things that you kind of work on a lot, which is M&A,
Yeah.
mergers and acquisitions for maybe some of the students. And can you kind of shed some light on kind of what goes into that? Like what kind of data are you going out and looking for? What's the end goal, I guess, of your job on that part of your job?
So a lot of my projects, at least at Oliver Wyman, are around what we call mergers and acquisitions, where we're gonna either an infrastructure firm comes to us or a PE firm, and they say, "Hey, we're going to look at this railroad, or we want to look at the short line industry, for example. Tell us more about it." Or if we're going to look at this particular railroad, tell us, is this a good investment, and help us build that case for our investment committee. My work is primarily around what's called post-merger integration. So how do we bring together two giant companies and help, integrate systems, people, processes. And it sounds simpler than it is, but if you think through everything from, okay, if I'm gonna integrate facilities, whose desks are we keeping? Whose computers are we keeping? What people are we keeping? All the way up to, what does the new org structure look like? Are we going to have a new vision? How do we ensure, my big thing is, how do we ensure both our internal stakeholders, our employees, our both sides feel safe and feel like they understand what's coming so that it doesn't cause distraction and confusion on day one. And then how do we ensure our external stakeholders understand what this new organization means for the industry? So if you're bringing together two known names, what does that look like? And what is that as a customer of both of those, one or both of those organizations? What does that mean for me and how I'm going to interact with the business post day one? So from a communication standpoint, we help quite a bit on making sure everyone understands the value, the thesis of the deal, and then making sure from an employee perspective, we're not forgetting about one side or the other, and it doesn't feel like this is we're buying you and our way is better. What's the best, to steal from one of our clients, what's the optimal solution for this integrated company?
Awesome.
Yeah.
Thanks for the quick education
Yeah.
there. You said it sounds easier. No, it doesn't sound easy. You were just describing. It sounds like a mountain worth of effort. There's one thing I think that I characterize about rail and the railroad industry when I was taking a tour of BNSF is, the tour guide says something to the effect of, in rail, would you rather be late or would you rather be early when you're delivering? And the answer is, trick question. You don't want to be either one of those. You want to be on time. Being early, being late, both wrong. And so with that said, we're at 1:45, and as a good logistician, this is the time we're supposed to be wrapping up here. What I wanted
Nice.
to try to do is just take 30 seconds each for just kind of a forward-looking statement, kind of what you're looking forward to, any major takeaways that the audience should take away kind of after hearing kind of a little bit about your personal, your professional, and your practitioner side. And if you want to think about it more, maybe Alan's ready for it.
Railroads are a really interesting industry to get into, and it means more than just working for a railroad operator, either big or small. There's all kinds of companies throughout Texas that do rail car servicing, that do rail operations within a chemical company's plant. There's all kinds of places that store rail cars when they're not being used, all kinds of things that we talked about. Cal talked about seasonality. There's all kinds of places where that happens in other parts of the state. So railroading is a really open opportunity for you to think about as a possible job. And if you don't want to have to move, you don't have to. There's a lot of that happening in Texas.
Okay.
Yeah, I think probably just expanding on that is when I used to recruit for the railroads, I would tell students it's like a railroad is like Disneyland. Like you don't ever have to leave the park to try something different, right? So you can go in and it's this whole incorporation. I was a finance major. I did coal planning. I did industrial products. I did sales in Ohio. I did demurrage, which is like a parking spot for rail cars. I never had to leave the rail industry to try something completely different. So I think for me, I love the railroad, obviously, but if you're considering that as a career, it is way more than just I'm going to go, as my family thought I was going to do, work on the railroad. It's more than that, and there are more options than that. So definitely something to keep in mind.
So thank you. Good advice. Well, with that, do we have some time for any questions that we've got from the room? To repeat, what was the most challenging part of kind of getting started in the railroad industry?
Yeah, I mean, to be frank, I think being a woman in the rail industry is challenging the right word. I guess most meetings I'm in, I'm one of maybe two females in a room. That is getting better. I have gotten thick skin now that I didn't have as a 23-year-old recent grad, but I think it has positioned me as a better mother and a better wife because I have learned to navigate in an industry that requires you to think a little differently and respond differently and have safety boots. So you're dressing a little differently than you normally would. So for me, I think just navigating that, but at the end of the day, it's a challenge that I don't think I would take back because I'm a better person for that piece of it.
I think probably one of the biggest challenges I ever faced was when the agency I chose to work for, its purpose ended. I was at people talk about high-speed rail in Texas. I was in its first, I'm that old, 1990 was when it was first considered. And so there was a standalone state agency called the Texas High-Speed Rail Authority. And the legislature said, go figure out whether this makes sense. And if so, this to somebody to do it. We did all of that. It turns out that they over promised what they could actually raise in the market. And so they failed to meet some financial deadlines, which meant that our board said, well, then you don't have a license anymore, which meant that, well, there really wasn't a purpose to have the agency anymore. Turns out we were one of the only state agencies that effectively got sunset, like taken out back, salted the earth. There was nothing left. So I'm there like, okay, I thought this was going to be a sort of longer term deal than it was. Turns out I was able to use my network to find a place to land. That was when I joined Governor Bush's staff, which turned out to be a really good gig. So I think that part of you're going to find yourself in places where you thought this is going to be a path that's going to work. And even when it doesn't, one, you're going to learn something from it. And two, one of the things that was possible was that the connections that I made and the people that I'd known put me in a place where I could land on my feet. But it was an interesting couple of months there.
All right. Well, we'll be around a little bit here afterwards. Maybe just a quick round of applause for the great panelists here.